Chapter 20. Showing the resignation of accepted responsibility and the stirrings of personal resolve. 4 hours ago, Carrie had been naked in Crispin Shrike's bed, her body still humming with pleasure, her mind wonderfully empty of everything but sensation. Now she was fully dressed, sitting alone at a table in the Lido buffet, watching a woman in a rhinestone-encrusted sweatshirt pile her plate with 3 different kinds of potato salad. A grotesque still life titled Holiday Abundance, rendered in congealed mayonnaise and fluorescent lighting. She pushed a piece of feta around her plate with her fork. The food was fine. A decent Greek salad, a small piece of poached salmon, and a roll that was freshly baked this morning. But after the intimate choreography of room service breakfast on Crispin's balcony, with the perfect flat white and the morning light and the conversation that had unfolded between them like a rare and delicate flower, this solitary meal felt like being transplanted from a climate-controlled conservatory into the concrete and plastic of a discount garden centre. The clatter of cutlery against plates, the drone of a dozen overlapping conversations, the occasional burst of laughter. It all pressed against her ears like an unwelcome hand. She could still feel the lingering kiss she'd left him with, his hand warm on the small of her back as he whispered a promise to meet him later. That was where her mind was. Cabin 7068, 2 decks below. He had a panel to prepare for, he'd said. "I'll need some time to process," she'd told him. And the academic jargon falling so easily from her own lips had surprised them both.
Process,
He'd repeated, with a gently mocking raise of his eyebrows. And then,
of course.
process, as if what had happened between them could be neatly categorized and filed away. She pushed her chair back, suddenly needing movement. Through the windows, she could see the coastline of Great Oyster Bay sliding past. A constantly changing panorama of sea cliffs, forests, and small islands. A fishing boat chugged across their path, appearing tiny from the massive ship, a perfect composition of scale and contrast. Occasional buildings dotted the shore, isolated and dwarfed by the surrounding wilderness. It was all so beautiful, so utterly Australian, that on any other day she'd have been on deck with her camera. But today, not even the perfect photography conditions could compete with the overexposed, chaotic snapshot of her own anxieties. Carrie returned to her table, now seeing it as if through a viewfinder. The elderly couple by the window, a study in companionable shadows, their silhouettes perfectly mirrored as they bent over book and crossword. A family tableau at the next table. Harried parents, chocolate-smeared children, a ballet of chaos framed by the rectangular window. 2 women in their 50s deep in conversation, leaning across their nearly empty plates, their animated gestures like birds in flight. Settled people, tidy lives, a series of perfectly composed, slightly boring photographs of a world she only ever documented from the outside. She took a sip of water, the coldness shocking against her teeth. What she had with Crispin wasn't like those other connections. It was a hothouse flower, exquisite and rare, bred for its beauty rather than its hardiness. Outside the artificial climate of the cruise, it would wither the moment it encountered frost. She knew this. Of course she did. And yet... She checked her watch. Just past 1. The afternoon stretched before her, hours to fill before the evening's... date? Was that the word for agreeing to accompany a married man to a formal dinner in the ship's private restaurant? The thought of Margaret Shrike surfaced, unwelcome and sharp. A sudden blight threatening their perfect, sealed environment. A woman Carrie had never met, whose face she couldn't picture, whose life was a blank canvas. Did she suspect her husband was capable of this? Did she trust him completely? Would she care? Carrie wasn't usually the type to avoid uncomfortable truths, but right now, the image of Margaret Shrike, probably dignified, probably kind, probably completely undeserving of betrayal, was too sharp to look at directly. Carrie's throat tightened. She took a deliberate sip of ice water. the sharp cold a welcome shock. She needed to pull back from the dangerous edge of his real life, to remember who she was outside of Crispin's gravitational pull. And she knew just how to do it. First, the library. Carrie considered revisiting that two-story sanctuary where everything had changed between her and Crispin, where she'd first glimpsed and touched the man behind the academic facade as he'd sat absorbed in a first edition of Pride and Prejudice. But perhaps in the library, surrounded by books and the lingering memory of their connection, she might feel close to him again. She had a new mission in mind. Find one of Crispin's works. Read the words he'd written before he knew she existed. This felt like the next best thing to his presence. A private way to understand the man who'd admitted his failure to truly live the passionate history he studied. And from the quiet of the library, she'd venture into the next test, the workshop. Crispin had mentioned it casually this morning, after Carrie had emerged from a second shower in 2 hours.
I've sweet-talked Maeve into making 2 extra places available.
He'd said.
For us.
Us. Such a small word to carry so much weight. This was a more deliberate exposure, taking their hothouse flower from its protective glass into a controlled environment with witnesses, sitting beside him in a room full of aspiring writers, being introduced as, what, his friend, his lover, just another passenger? The possibilities made her stomach flutter. And then, the final test. Formal night, dinner in the steakhouse on deck 2. This was the thought that had been lurking at the edges of her mind, insistent and waiting. When Crispin had invited her, his eyes bright with anticipation, she'd said yes without thinking. Of course she'd said yes. She'd have said yes to just about anything he suggested in that moment, with the sheets still warm from their bodies, and his hand tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. I'm the one who agreed, she reminded herself. No one forced me. No one tricked me. But now, in the stark light of the buffet, the implications began to land, sharp and unwelcome, like hailstones on a tender seedling. The steakhouse wasn't the Princess Grill, or even the Queen's Grill, the absolute pinnacle of Cunard luxury, but it was still a world away from the Britannia restaurant where she'd been dining with the Allcrofts and Quiet Thea. The steakhouse was a special occasion restaurant. It had to be booked and an extra fee paid. This wasn't a regular meal. Her hand unconsciously gripped the edge of the table as 2 distinct worries surfaced, demanding attention. First, her dress. She'd packed exactly one formal outfit for the cruise, a simple emerald gown that she'd worn to gallery openings and the occasional awards dinner. It wasn't about the cost. It was about authenticity. The women in Crispin's circles probably wore clothes with stories. Vintage Dior found in a Parisian flea market, or a bespoke piece commissioned for a university function. Her dress was just a dress. She'd feel like a prop in someone else's carefully staged photograph, an object chosen for visual contrast rather than its own meaning. The second worry was deeper and more tangled. Why was Crispin doing this? Taking her to dinner in such a public, exclusive setting was an unmistakable statement. They would be seen together. People would talk. That was inevitable. Was this recklessness, or was the risk itself part of the thrill for him? A disposable adventure a world away from his real life. And if so, where did that leave her? The temporary leading lady? The exotic local colour to be discussed later over drinks with colleagues? The questions circled, unanswerable. The ship would reach Sydney soon, and then... what? She'd be back to her real life, back to her mother, back to the responsibilities that had been temporarily suspended. The thought brought both comfort and a sharp pang of loss. Her time with this perfect rare bloom was running out. Like all hothouse flowers, it had a strictly limited lifespan. The buffet had begun to clear out, the lunch rush tapering off. A member of the staff approached, a young woman with a name badge that identified her as Melissa from the Philippines.
"Finished with your lunch, madam?"
She asked, her hand hovering near the plate.
"Was everything okay?"
Perfect, Carrie assured her. Just not very hungry today,
The sea air,
Melissa said knowingly.
sometimes it takes away the appetite.
She gathered the plate and silverware with smooth movements.
Oh, formal night tonight. So exciting. Everyone looks so wonderful.
I'm sure they do, Carrie said, the words coming out tighter than she intended. Melissa seemed to notice.
You know what I love about formal night? Seeing all the different styles. Some passengers with very simple outfits, some with the fanciest dresses. All beautiful in their own way. And those having the most fun aren't the ones wearing the most expensive clothing.
With that, she whisked the plate away, leaving Carrie to ponder the unexpected wisdom of cruise ship waitstaff. All beautiful in their own way. Perhaps it wasn't about competing with designer gowns after all. Perhaps it was about owning her space, whether in a fancy dress or Crispin's world. The noise of the buffet seemed suddenly distant, no longer pressing against her skull. She looked out at the water, at the light playing across its surface, at the unpredictable patterns of wave and foam. What she had with Crispin was undeniably beautiful. Fragile, yes, but no less valuable for its transience. And maybe its very impermanence was what made it so precious, like the perfect light that photographers chase, knowing it will last only minutes. Carrie gathered her things and stood. She knew with absolute certainty what she would do. She wouldn't just see it through. She would walk right into the center of it, camera or no camera, and see what the light was like. As she stepped into the lift, her reflection caught in the polished brass doors. She looked the same as always. Blonde hair in its practical ponytail, simple linen shirt, the camera bag that was as much a part of her as her right arm. But there was something different in her eyes, a brightness that hadn't been there before. The lift doors closed, sealing her in with her reflection and her thoughts. She didn't know what she was getting into, but for the first time in longer than she could remember, she was excited to find out.